if you didn't know the beats, didn't know the part, didn't know the feel of the guitar player that you're about to punch in, and you screwed that up, you opened up a can of worms. So you either passed or you failed. Back then, it taught me you do your job right or the next guy's coming in. And those were tricky things, the punches, the editing.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, the podcast bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Roger Moutenot, a multi-platinum, Grammy-nominated producer and engineer here in Nashville, Tennessee. Roger started out in Cliffside Park, New Jersey, with a view of Manhattan, recording bands from his basement studio before attending the Institute of Audio Research in New York and landing a job finally at Skyline Studios back in 1975. During his time at Skyline, Roger recorded many important artists, including Laurie Anderson, They Might Be Giants, and 10,000 Maniacs. Making the inevitable shift to freelance, Roger began working at Chung King House of Metal with Run DMC, Heavy D, and Stetsasonic, and also recording greats from the New York jazz scene, John Zorn, Bill Frisell, and Don Byron. Moving to Nashville, Tennessee in the 90s, I first met Roger when he was mixing Jill Sobule at Woodland Studios, where I was interning. And then we got a chance to work together at Alex the Great studio, owned by Robin Eaton and Brad Jones, both guests on the podcast, recording a cool indie rock band called Toy Bean. Remember that session?
Yep, absolutely.
In 1993, Roger produced Painful for the college radio favorites Yo La Tengo, which began a long relationship with the band, going on to record 7 full-length albums. These included the critically acclaimed albums I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One in 97 and 2000's And Then Nothing Turned Itself Inside Out. Roger continued to make records in both Nashville and New York until building his own Hap-Town studios where we are today. And he has a long list of credits which include producing Paula Cole's double platinum Grammy-nominated album This Fire, Joseph Arthur, Lamb Chop, Josh Rouse, Jefferson Airplane, Hot Tuna guitarist Jorma Kaukonen. Am I saying that right?
Jorma Kaukonen.
Jorma Kaukonen. I remember his stuff. He was like fantastic with the finger picks on acoustic. Yeah. Lou Reed, Roseanne Cash, John Cale, Jeff the Brotherhood, Sunvolt, Mindy Smith, Cheap Trick, Gillian Welch, and John Mayer, and the list goes on. Please welcome Roger Moutenot to Recording Studio Rockstars. Roger.
Thank you, Lidge.
Are you ready to rock, dude?
I am, even as tattered as I am from late night sessions, I am ready to fucking rock.
Fucking rock, dude. I love it. Oh, you know, we forgot to start with our intro.
Our
musical intro.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about that. We want to talk about the beginning of recording for you, but why don't you just introduce briefly the beginning of recording, period?
Well, I have a little device over here in my studio, which I love to show bands when they walk through the door before we start recording. And it is a 1902 Edison wax cylinder recorder. And the thing that blows me away is a couple of things. One is the physics behind that piece of device, where a band, a Sousa band, most likely back when it first started, would stand in front, play as loud as they could into the horn, and this little needle would scribe into the wax this beautiful replication of it.
Yeah, it's just like maybe not scratching it into the wax.
Yeah. Just by the sheer volume. And not only, if you think about the engineering, what they did was they physically moved people in the room to get the balances that were desired. So the melody guy would be up front. Everybody who was, filling in would be moved back. Whoever they didn't really want to hear so much, they were in the back room. And I thought that's really, if you think about it, we're still doing that. We're still balancing levels. We do it differently nowadays. But anyway, other thing that blows away is it still works. It's from 1902, and it It's a simple spring-loaded thing, but I can turn it on and listen to this great music.
Well, let's hear it.
So if you think about that, it's actually not that long ago.
When was that?
1902, 1900s.
Wow.
And Edison actually built his own little studio, which was just padded.
And that was in the Edison labs where they were inventing the light bulb
on
and
that
all
property. There, you can go online and find old pictures
New
of
Jersey,
these
where you're
bands.
from.
Yeah, that's where all music started.
Well, so very cool, man. You know, the first thing that comes to mind is on this show, we spend a lot of time focusing on recording tips and tricks and secrets and everything. Like, what do you think was going on in their mind? What kind of recording tips were they focused on? Were they looking at each other going like, man, how do we get this thing to sound louder?
True. I bet you they were. But I think they were blown away. Look what we just did. Because it was literally the first time that you didn't have to be in front of a band or a musician. You could sit in your house. I could pick that up and go outside, and it's portable. It's the first.
It's wind up.
It's wind up. No batteries, no plug in. And I think they were blown away, and just the fact that this is the first time we actually were able to store sound on something. A storage system. That's all it is, basically, a storage system.
Yeah.
And we're now we went from that to tape machines, and now we're at 0 and 1s, still trying to figure out how to store
the
it.
Edison cylinder is like the original hard drive, right?
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
But I remember also hearing stories that when they created that, his first business plan for that was he thought he was going to be recording businessmen who were like transcribing their speeches or their ideas on cylinders and sending them to each other to play back.
Right.
I don't even know that it was almost like the music was a bit of a surprise. I remember hearing
It was almost like a dictaphone, like a
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
like
that.
a little handheld tape recorder.
I did not know that.
Probably same thing with the micro cassette. You know, that was invented for keeping track of of lectures
Right.
and ideas. Next thing you know, we're using it in the studio to get the coolest drum sounds.
Right, because of the limiting in it.
Yeah,
and then,
the Crapsta mic.
Yeah. I have a bunch of that stuff laying around.
That's awesome, man. So drop us, tell us 3 little secret things that you got like that.
Well, one thing is a toy microphone. I bought a lot of toys for my kids, and as they grew up, I brought them to the studio. But one I like is this little toy mic that you dial in a frequency on the radio, and you can actually sing through it. And so you can kind of, like the Beatles, you could kind of roll the knob on the tuner and kind of get some kind of
Fuzz it in and out.
Fuzz in and out kind of stuff. That's fun. Yeah, so I have a little 2-track tape machine, Sony, and the mics that came with it are really cool, and it's flat. It's a flat little plastic mic, and I tape those onto guitars sometimes. So instead of taking the jack from the guitar, I'm actually recording the physical. I get this kind of weird physical sound from the guitar.
Nice.
That goes into an amp, and then I re-record it.
I like that. What was the box you were pointing at over
There's
there?
other boxes. This box a friend of mine in New York makes, it's a sample box, and he's grown with this idea. It's called Brand New Noise, and it's a little box, has 2 buttons on it. One's record, and one is playback, and you have a pitch knob. So if I were to record into it, I can. You can change the pitch and all that stuff. It's cool. So I would put that in front of the speaker, re-record vocals sometimes, maybe do pitch shit on it, and but he has some other devices like Kalimbas now and he has loop modes, and they're really cool. You should check them out.
That's cool, man. I like that. That was reminding me, I was telling you of the time when I was doing, I think it was maybe the Toy Bean record with you and Chuck Hatcher when I met him, and he took out a micro cassette and would record what was coming out of the speaker, and then we'd rewind that and play that back in on its own tracks. And
so you almost get like a filtered version of what was
you just like you're relayering the same stuff, and it just takes it to a whole new place. Do you remember this trick where you take two jam boxes and with a cassette in each one, and you put them across a room that's got some echo to it? And then you record yourself speaking into one of them and you play it back, and then you record it across the room in the other one. And then you rewind it and then you play that one back and record it on the original, and you just bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And the original sound eventually disappears, and all you're left with is this weird warping, morphing sound of just the resonant tones of the room.
I had not done that, but that's how I started recording in my basement.
With two cassettes?
One was like a little dictaphone, 3-inch hub, reel-to-reel, which fascinated the hell out of me and really brought me into this world because I wanted to know how that worked. And then I think I had a boombox or some other device, so I'd play my part on the dictaphone, play that live in the room, play along to it, kind of like Les Paul did, bouncing from one device to another to get my multi-track version of my song.
That's awesome.
And I did notice the one thing I learned was that first track I did, because of tape generation, it got moved to the background, which if you think that's what the Beatles fought when they were doing all their stuff. So I think George Martin's brilliance was he knew that physics that was going to happen and made sure, that they attended that idea that you're going to lose a generation and that stuff's going to be put further back on the tape.
So they probably drew out charts or mental charts about when to record which overdub so that at the end it was going to be in the right spot. The one they wanted up front. Again, mixing, levels, balancing, Yeah.
And yeah.
All right. So one of the questions I like to ask at the beginning of the show is, what did starting out in recording smell like to you?
Smell like to me? It smelled beautiful. It smelled like roses. It smelled. I was playing in a band, and my great friend Dan Durkin across the street, him and I think we got guitars when we were like 10. We had no idea what we were doing, but we formed a band. We didn't know chords even. And then Rick Norman joined the band, Mike Mari, and I remember being in the basement and learning harmonies and learning parts and theory, music theory. Those guys, they were older than me. I was the younger one. Taught me a lot about that. But I bought a 4-track, and as soon as I bought that 4-track, my life changed. It was like I knew I was bit. I knew I wanted to do this.
Did you get a cassette 4-track, or did you get a fancier reel-to-reel?
TX 4-track.
The real deal.
Yeah.
You had to get a mixer, right?
I bought a Allen and Heath little 8-channel mixer. I bought 6 Byron Dynamic microphones, all the same. I bought some instruments. I bought a drum machine, drums. I bought a Wurlitzer for like $50 back then. This is 1975. And I started recording my band, and I'm telling you, that was it. It smelled like roses. I mean, I just was so taken by it that I knew what I wanted to do with my life.
What happened when you finished a recording back then? You mixed it to what? What'd you even mix it to?
I mixed it to Advent cassette deck.
Nice.
Really top of the line.
Nice.
I wasn't sure what we were recording for yet, but I knew that it was something I really wanted to do. That led to recording other bands, friends, to the point, and this is in my parents' basement. This is like, I'm 16, 17 years old. And I had a local music store that I would get all my gear from, get tape from, get, whatever I needed. And I met a jazz saxophone player from New York, and he said, I need to do some demos, and I heard you have a little studio. And I said, sure, yeah. And I had to go ask my parents, hey, I have a paid gig to do a little session in the basement. It's a jazz band, a trio. And my dad and mom said, we'd go out for dinner, you guys can record, because they all worked during the day. Showed up really late, And it was a horn section. It was a keyboard, bass, drums, guitar player, and percussionist. And these guys walked in. They were older. They
It's a horn, keyboard, bass,
horn
guitar.
section, 3 horns.
So 3
bass,
horns. So
drums.
that's more microphones than you've got.
Yes. And I'm a 16, 17-year-old kid, and these guys walk in. They were a really amazing band. I'll say that first. They walked in, and they were like, dude, what are we doing in this kid's basement? What the heck? What do we want? You know. So right then and there, I'm like, holy crap. And I had more players than mics. So I spot mic'd the room. It was basically, I can't mic everything. I'm not going to, let me figure out how it is. And we record 1, 2 songs, and it actually sounded great. Not me, them. They were really great. They listened to one another. No headphones. I didn't have headphones. The room was smaller. But the funny story is my dad walks in. Got started late, so it's now 11 o'clock at night. My dad walks in red-faced and said, get these guys out of my house. And the session ended there. And I didn't know why until about a month later. My dad told me he caught the drummer, one guy, snorting speed in his house, and he's like, I'm not going to have sex, drugs, and rock and roll in my house.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to support my kids, but there's a threshold.
Yeah. Life in Cliffside Park as a teenager, there were so many bands. Music was flourishing in Cliffside Park and Fort Lee and all the towns around. And so I was the go-to guy, which, you know, then I moved to my friend's house and I started recording even more people. But there came to a point when I realized I need more knowledge.
Yeah.
I need to understand more about what I'm doing. And that's when I decided to go to school for engineering.
And that was the Institute of Audio Research. It sounds so heavy.
It was heavier than heavy, Lidge. It was, so I signed into the program, and basically it was nothing but math. It was formulas. It was everything physics. It was everything to do about recording, the gear, what happens, wavelengths, frequencies, phase, all this stuff. But there were no, it took me 6 months, 7 months to get into the studio, figure out how to set up a microphone. It was all theory, all physics. And I kind of got pissed off at that, saying, wait a minute, I want to learn how to, set a mic up. What do you do with this and how do you do that? So I was a little like, I thought this would be different. But in hindsight, it was perfect. Because when I got into a studio, I still had no idea how to do certain things. And in 2 months, with that backbone of physics and math and all this stuff, in 2 months, I understood everything almost,
Yeah.
It was just a greater education than someone saying, so you put a mic on the kick drum this far away and you use these kind of mics, or, it was a better education.
It was kind of like my story going to MTSU. What I got out of there was the tech stuff and understanding more of the theoretical knowledge behind stuff. I didn't learn how to make records until I was at Alex the Great working with Robin and Brad and you.
Probably that's the way it should be. I know guys who come from certain schools and they know how to set up a microphone. They know how to set up a drum set and mic pre's and the signal flow, but they're lacking in some other, technical basic theories,
Well, it seems like that beginning when you're learning stuff, that's sort of, especially when you're younger too, it seems like that's kind of an ideal time to really learn that theory.
Yeah, I was horrible at math too. So it was like I'd find myself 5 o'clock in the morning going over one theory just to understand it. And, it would take me hours to like, oh, I get it now, But,
well, that's cool, man. Well, so, hey, I like to ask guests on the show also to kick us off with an inspirational quote. You got anything to get us inspired to hit the studio, make records?
Well, I worked with some great people, and almost most of them, it wasn't what they said to me. It's how they carried themselves in the studio and their musicality and their devotion to what they did was most inspiring to me. And those people I admired the hell out of. But I will tell you one thing that really transformed me, and that was I was doing Magic and Lost with Lou Reed, my icon, one of my icons, because I grew up learning how to play guitar to the Velvet Underground because the chords were so basic,
right.
And the songs were so cool. So when I first met him, that was the first words out of my mouth. I learned how to play guitar listening to you.
Why don't you try going up instead of down on that one note?
So anyway, we're making Magic and Lost, which was a really kind of difficult record for him because it was a record of songs that were for his friends that were passing. He had a lot of friends passing on in life, and he wanted to make an ode to his best buds. But we had a great time making a record. And one day he came in, and it's just him and I sitting there where I'm getting ready for the session, and he turned to me and goes, I just can't believe I get to do this. I get to come in to the studio and make music. And I looked at him, and in my head I'm thinking, you're an icon. You deserve this. But what I took away from that is this guy, at the age of, I guess he was my age, still was a kid in the candy store. He still loved coming to work and do what he did. And he felt blessed and honored to be able to do that. And I can't remember how old I was, 34. I was 34 years old, and I said to myself, I hope I can be that person too. Like I can come into work and really love what I do and really want to be there and have fun. And I am now his age.
Here you are now, right?
60 years old. And I got to say, Lidge, I come into work every day with the anticipation of what could happen, what's going to happen. I love what I do. I wouldn't change my life for anything.
That's awesome. Yeah, I go through ups and downs with the studio. I mean, I think we all do. It's it's just life and work and stuff. But inevitably, I always find myself walking into my studio, and if I pause for a minute and quit worrying about whatever I was worrying about, I stop and I look around. I'm like, holy shit, man, this is really cool. Like, I just want to hang out and just make some stuff.
Yeah.
Just like make some stuff up. And I was thinking about that too. One of the things that I really appreciated about working with you and Robin and Brad, and especially that time, which for me feels like a different way of making records than the way I make records now, and I probably need to get back to it. At that time, it was all about finding a cool experiment for sound, creating something unusual and new and different. And maybe this now more often I find myself trying to understand how to make things loud and powerful and all these other things. And I kind of miss, wanting to know about how to use a microcassette and paste it back onto a track for a cool effect instead, or broadcasting a microphone over the FM radio rather than, some kind of crazy side chaining loudness technique to make things sound stupidly loud out of my speakers.
I love side chaining.
But I love that too. I love that too.
Well, here's the thing.
But there is almost like two things, right?
You got to do it all. And you have to pull out the tricks when they're necessary. Tricking for the sake of tricking is, it can be pretentious sometimes and just not, what does the song call for? What does that band sound like? What are you trying to achieve in that song? And that's the essence. If it doesn't belong there, don't do the trick. Don't do the microcassette. But that's part of my backbone because of working with John Zorn and Bill Frisell and guys within those bands, Joey Barron. I mean, the first time I recorded Joey Barron, he was throwing percussion instruments at his drum set. That was the drum part. I got sounds on his drums. I was like, Joey, hit the snare, give me the toms. And he asked me for a percussion table, and he laid out all this shit on the table. And I put 2 mics over the percussion table in case that's what he's doing. I was covering all bases. We start the song, no Joey, no Joey. All of a sudden I hear, he's throwing these things at the drums. I was like, Joey, why didn't you tell me that's what the part was, But, that to me, all these crazy guys and what they were doing with their instruments, that inspired me, and that's what I latched onto. There's, if I can backtrack a second, when I first started working at Skyline, I had I was assigned to the owner as an assistant, and if you could make it through on his sessions, eventually you could start working with other people. So the owner gave me kind of like a little booklet. These are the mics I use on everything. These are the mic pre-levels. This is the fader levels. If I have EQ, this is the EQ on drums. So every session, you would start out with his template.
Right.
The guy, I remember saying to him, I hope I'm half the engineer you are. He was always, everything sounded great. It was a beautiful replication of what was going on out in the live room. Always sounded great. Made it through his session, got the okay that, he's okay, he knows what's going on. Let him work with some of the other engineers in the house. And I got assigned to my friend Dave, who was the nighttime engineer. It was never lockouts back then. It was always a bunch of sessions. You might have 2 or 3 sessions in the daytime, and then the crazy people come in at the nighttime. So I got assigned to Dave, and Dave would build little stuff on his own, or, hey, go take the Marshall head, come out of the speaker jack into a DI, don't tell anybody, and then bring that into the line, and we'll put that straight into the tape machine, see what that sounds like. And I was like, wow, yeah, let's do that. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
So Dave, I latched onto Dave, his mentality of doing things. And, I got to work with the Flesh Tones and John Cale on those sessions and Alan Vega, and those are wacky people. And we always pushed the boundaries of what it is we were trying to do. And so I gravitated towards that. And I learned to do the clean, nice recordings, replicating what the sound is for real. But I'm always a guy who was like, let's bend it. Let's try something different,
That's cool. Well, yeah, I like that you got all those different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because that gives you a real skill set. I mean, when I met you, you were mixing Jill Sobule's record, which had all these elements of kind of trying to break different rules. And yet at the same time, you were also pulling out all the tricks for how to make it sound hi-fi and, competitive and sound great on the radio next to all the rest of the records and songs that were out there. Well, so you've done a lot of stuff. You've got a long career and a long credit list. Let's humanize it a little bit too, and share with us an important failure for you, something where maybe on your long journey of recording, it didn't go so well and became a great learning experience.
Well, I think you said I started in 75, but I actually started at the studio in 79.
Okay.
And back then, there was no SMPTE. There was nothing. You had a tape machine, and you had a console, and you had microphones, and your outboard gear. But the thing about that time period was, if you were an assistant in a tape op, and you'll know this because and half your listeners might still work with tape, it was pass or fail. So punching in, if you didn't know the beats, didn't know the part, didn't know the feel of the guitar player that you're about to punch in, and you screwed that up, you opened up a can of worms. So you either passed or you failed. If you were editing a tape machine, editing parts, drum parts, to get the take, if you didn't know how to edit, blah, blah, blah. And I think it was pass or fail. And I think back then it taught me, you do your job right, or the next guy's coming in. And those were tricky things, the punches, the editing, the, mixing. There was no recall.
Yeah, there was no undo button.
There was no undo button. So you either did it right or you didn't do it. And I did a couple of sessions. There were a couple of things that didn't go quite right. But you absolutely learn from that, and you never do that again. Because to have a whole session turn on you and go, why'd you just punch out late? What the hell was that about? And you just like, So you learn to get your job right, do it right, and know that there were consequences if you didn't.
Yeah, that was the real benefit, is that there were consequences.
Yeah.
If you didn't have a room full of people turning around and looking at you, that crappy punch out wouldn't have taught you anything.
Right. So you got it right or you got it real wrong.
What are some of the ways that people have an opportunity to put themselves under that kind of, well, I'm going to use the word pressure. It's not really about pressure, but it kind of is.
It is pressure.
Where do you find an opportunity like that now, without tape and without punching? And
well, I still think you could take a whole session. A band comes in, they're relying on you to take their ideas and make the best of it and help in that process. And I think if you don't take it seriously enough and put your heart and soul into it, that's pressure. Every session I do here, I take it as pressure. I want to make the best possible thing for this band, this artist, and for myself. You know, I try to make a band's album. I try to make an artist album. I don't try to make my album.
yeah,
But I think the pressure's there. You just have to embrace it and use that, not to make it crush you, but really take it seriously. And I think that it will benefit you.
it's less about making a mistake and the pressure of it so much as it is about being in tune with the moment.
Yeah.
It's like when you're on a session and you're just exactly on the same page with everybody in the band. It's such a good feeling, and then you make great stuff.
One of my favorite quotes is, and this is not technical, this is more musical, if you're going to make a mistake, make it big. Right. I love that because it's like, don't hold back. Don't set boundaries for yourself. But that does not apply for the technical guy if you're going to make a mistake. Although maybe some mistakes you go, wow, that I wouldn't have done that before.
4-button push in on 1176,
so
right?
It could go for both ways. But sometimes if I'm writing a song on my own, I'll either open up 4 tracks or 8 tracks in Pro Tools. And that's it. That's all I'm going to give myself.
Nice.
And the other thing I do is if you look at my plugin list, I have an EQ, I have a compressor, I have a decapitator, I have Echo Boy, and that's it. I have no plugins.
Really?
I have no plugins. That's the only plugins I have.
Well, that's kind of exciting to hear, because then I'm going to have to dig in and find out what you do with all this stuff and how you mix and everything.
I try not to use plugins. I try to use my outboard gear. I try to use certain microphones to give me certain curves of EQ. I try to reamp things. I try to use anything I put my hands on as opposed to the mouse. I use my console. I'd rather get the sound going onto tape than me having this idea that I could manipulate it down the road. Not only to me does that bring the song into a focus right from the get-go, but yeah, that's the main part. It's just I want that thing to feel like it's going to feel right from the start. Yeah. I don't want to throw down stuff and then manipulate it and find out, where is this song going? This is where the song's going. Make decisions right from the get-go.
I know that you've got your console here. Is that the Soundcraft Ghost? Is that right? I remember you getting that. Do you still typically take Pro Tools and sort of break it out on faders or anything like that?
I do.
You want to talk about that setup a little bit? What does that look like? What are the benefits, or what are the things you really like about setting up that way?
Well, I like having sends. I have plates. I built a little spring reverb.
Nice.
Which is a point I'd like to make to you guys out there, is make your studio your own by having a couple of things that are quirky. You know, I had this tank reverb. I wired it up, put it off a send off my console, and now it's like one of my favorite little things to put things through, you know. It's crappy sounding, but in the mix, it just has this nice little point and color. But, you know, typically I'll spread my I'll pretty much make stems. I won't have like the kick drum on its own fader and the snare on its own. I'll have drum tracks and bass, guitars, separate everything out in that way as stems. I use my outboard compressors, and during mixing, bus compression, I'll do things like that, typically.
Nice. All right, well, so here's a question. I kind of went for the failure. Now let's go for something that was a real aha moment for you in recording.
I guess it would be the fact that my weirdness and oddity actually scored me a good gig.
Nice.
So I'm doing this Japanese record in New York at one of the greater studios, which now is blanking my mind. Magic Shop.
Okay, yeah, the Magic Shop.
Only because that console was the dopest.
Yeah, that was
console.
the wild wraparound Neve.
Yeah, it was
console,
a broadcast Neve, 3-band, 4 sends, and a fader and a pan pot. And if you want to talk about clear, meaty, harmonic distortion, that console was the bomb. But I'm doing a project there with a Japanese band. They had programmed drums, and I wasn't so much into the programmed drums. So I said, let's incorporate a real drummer. We'll do simple. We won't have a real whole kit part thing. Let's just get something going. And I heard about this guy, Jay Belrose. So Jay has played with a bunch of bands now, like great bands, like Robert Plant, Krause. He was the drummer on that project.
And Alison Krause. Oh, right. The Band of Joy.
Band of Joy.
Yeah.
Great drummer. But back then, he was like this unknown kid that was really cool. So he walks in, and I had 2 Auratone mics strapped to mic stands on the toms. And he walks in, and we did this part with using the Auratones as the microphones.
Wow, the speakers.
The speakers. Yeah, we just wired them backwards, put them into a mic pre, and it actually ended up sounding crappily good. It just fit the drum machines. The drum machines had all the presence and stuff, and this tom part he did through these Auratones just kind of breathed in there beautifully and did exactly what I was hoping for. But he was like, that is the weirdest thing ever. A week later, I got a call from Paula and said, hey, Jay just worked with you. He said he had a lot of fun, blah, blah, blah. Would you like to do my record? And I was like, sure. And that turned out to be one of my bigger, selling records I worked on. But
I'm glad you
so
transitioned
through that
to
quirkiness and trying to be my own self, I got a gig out of it.
So let's talk about that record. That's an amazing record. I remember listening to it and just thinking, holy shit, it just really sounds so good. Tell us about making This Fire with Paula Cole.
Well, she had made the record with somebody else, and it got shelved. It was kind of like, was Pro Tools around? I don't even know. But it was more of like looping and editing, and Paula wanted to do more of a live thing. So her and Jay came, and we cut the tracks, just the 2 of them. And I did it 15 IPs, 24 track with SR Dolby.
I remember you telling me that was sort of like
and it was
the
so
sweet
cool.
deal right there.
It was so cool.
So 15 IPs was the multi-track.
Yeah. Yeah, and SR Dolby. It was the only record I did like that, and I wish I would do more of it. Dolby's a little quirky, though. It was really kind of hard because it's a critical alignment.
Right, you had to hit the sweet spot with it.
You had to hit the sweet spot, or you could actually lose your high end, or you get some compression sounding shit. But we tracked the record, just the 2 of them, and
so it's Paula and the drummer.
Paula and drummer, that's it.
Okay.
That was the tracking session. Sitting sometimes behind a Bosendorfer piano and singing her lead vocal. Great.
How the hell do you record a Bosendorfer piano and a live vocal at the same time and get the right sound?
This thing's massive. You ever see a Bosendorfer? It's like 20 feet long. It feels like it's like massive.
It's a ship.
It is a ship, and it has the extra octave on the bottom.
Wow.
But I put that baffled off a little bit, so the leakage. So there's pads.
So she's
for the opened end.
She's sitting at the piano.
She's sitting at the piano, nice. I had a U47 facing her, pad right behind that, and then the piano open with I'm all about bleed too.
But also in like a big enough space that the piano's not just shouting back at the vocal
she's in the big room, and I had Jay in a booth area, but a big booth area. So we cut all the songs like that. So most of those vocals are just one take, which is, amazing. That's an amazing artist that can pull that off.
What about the piano miking? What sort of mic positions and stuff might you do on that?
I could have put 57s, or I could have put a 58.
Or a pair of Aratones.
Or a pair of Aratones. That piano just, I think I tried a couple of different microphones, and I was like, wow, it's just so good sounding. You could do anything.
Is it kind of how I imagine it, where you would take the high end of the piano, pan it to one side, the low end mic, pan it to the other, and put the vocal in the middle, and there you go?
Yep.
Check phase.
Yeah. And the great thing about Jay recording him was he'd almost do prepared drums. So he'd have things hanging off his hi-hat that was giving the hi-hat a little different flavor.
He didn't start throwing percussion at the
No,
Bosendorfer,
he was not
did he?
throwing percussion. He might have thrown some shit at me, but...
All right.
But the funny thing about that record is, and typically back then, record company people would come by, managers would come by, this would come by, check out what you're doing. No one came by to hear anything. After we cut the tracks, we had Tony Levin, the great Tony Levin, come down, put some bass on.
Did he play the stick too?
He played. I had him play I had him play with his little hand sticks. He has those things he puts on his hands to do the thump. Boom, boom, bam, 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 bam.
Awesome, man. Awesome.
I had him. He played a rubber band bass.
Wow.
And he played the stick. I think he played it on one or two songs. And we had two other guys come down. Greg Leitz played some guitar. I got to play a couple little things on the record. And this guy Seamus, who did some woodwind stuff, if I remember. But we made that record in 3 weeks because there was no money left, because she had spent the money on the first version. No one heard anything. And there was one song, Where Are All the Cowboys Gone, that we didn't really have enough time or money to pay Tony to put bass on that song. So we didn't put bass on the song. And that was the first single.
Wow.
But I remember sending it off to my manager, and he called me back. And I thought we did a great job, everybody. That was good. And he called me back and said, you did it. I was like, I did what? And he goes, this is going to be a hit. I was like, no. And sure enough, it just blew up.
That's great, man. That's
so that was a fun record and a fun time, and helped my career.
So she was a great performer, great songs, great performer. But I love that you started out tracking just her and the drums. There's something about, tracking with two people in some situations can be too limiting, but in something like that, you really get down to the essence of what this song feels like.
Yeah. If you get that stuff going, and that is like you're listening to the bass and drums and vocals, and you say, nothing's bothering me. Everything's cool. If you can't build upon that, something's wrong with you. So if you get this tight essence of the core, the real base of what's happening, you could do anything on top of that.
So did Tony come and play bass as an overdub on this stuff?
Yeah, everybody was
nice. And then it was bass next, and then after that was the additional stuff.
Greg Leeds came, played some slide guitars, and then Seamus came and did some other stuff.
All right, cool. All right, Rockstars, we'll definitely put links. Look for YouTube videos or whatever in the show notes for this. I'll link to that stuff so you can check it out. How about telling us about building your studio down here, Hap-Town Studios? I remember when you were building this place and you were kind of going through that. Was it like, oh yeah, I got this, or was it a scary proposition to build a studio of your own?
Well, before I built the studio, I was sharing a space with 3 other guys in a bank, which
I remember that.
Really dope. It was really amazing. It was a 5,000 square foot bank. I think the ceiling height was 40 feet. We had literally 3 rooms in one space. So I had like 12 dressers. I had 8 LA2As. I had, like 7 Pultecs. I had 60 channels of Need mic pre's. I had, it was crazy how much gear we had in that place. But it was a struggle to balance our schedules, And that's when I really decided I need my own space. I looked around for quite a long time trying to find a space, and I was driving down this street and saw a fresh sign up for sale. And it was an auto body place. And I just wanted a blank slate. I didn't want something that was too small, too big, blah, blah, blah. And the price on this thing was crazy, so
yeah,
good.
And
So
you knew you were going to need money to build.
yeah, and I had to do the build out. The only problem was I didn't do, again, we get back to math. I didn't do the math right. I saw this place. It's close to 4,000, 5,000 square feet. And I didn't think about materials.
Right.
So I was like, yes, this is going to be perfect. And then I started, I read 3 or 4 books on ideas, different ideas, from how to build a $4 million complex to how to build a $20 complex. And I incorporated a lot of those cheaper ideas into the build out. But really, when I started to do the math on insulation, wiring, soundproofing, blah, this and that, it went through the roof. I mean, so I did phases. It took me a while. Me and one other guy built this whole place by ourselves because that cut cost. You know, we framed everything. That you did all your work, no? On your studio?
Well, I designed it, and I hired people to help me build, and I did some of the, hammering myself, but not the framing stuff. Not like.
But I read a lot about building the physics, this, standing waves, all this stuff, and before I even put my first nail into the wall, and
it was kind of going back to school again. I remember that feeling myself. It was a lot of fun.
And it's not perfect, nor did I want it to be. I want this place to have its own uniqueness. As it's live, it's open.
Quiet in here. I don't hear anything going by, no trucks, no cars.
Oh, you will.
Actually, there's a story I've told on the podcast a few times, and it's about you. I remember because the train's back there, and before you sort of had your final sound lock room in the back, you said that you could still hear the train when it would go by through the garage, but you said, remarkably, the train has somehow never made it onto an actual record or recording. There's something musical about the sound of a train that it never disturbs a record.
There are moments when I'll be honest, I have to say, hey, if we're doing a soft vocal, we're doing something, and there's a mega train going by, I will stop. But I've been to Greg Calby, I've been to Bob Ludwig, I've been to a whole bunch of different great mastering engineers in their rooms. And if you're going to hear anything like that, you're going to hear it. And I walk into these guys going, listen, my studio's kind of by trains, so you got to tell me if you hear this low end rumble, because I'm dying to know. And everybody would say no. And I'd be like, what the hell? Why? I can hear it in my ears. Why isn't it picking up, But, it's never been a problem. But
that's cool, man. Well, for me, I've found that if there's ever a train going by, more often than not, the artist is like, oh, cool, the sound of a train.
Oh, no.
Somehow it makes your record legit, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It's the inner hobo on us all.
I get a lot of bands from Denmark or Germany that have been here, and they always say, hey, can we record? Can we set some mics up out there and record the train? I'm like, maybe.
I had that with one artist, and he actually got himself a little thing and recorded the train down by his house, and then had me fly it into the mix later. Yeah. And I was like, all right. Well, so let's jump to one of the coolest bands that you've worked with. You've worked with many cool bands. Let's talk about Yo La Tengo. These guys are so awesome. What did you learn from working with Yo La Tengo?
How to be a psychiatrist.
Cool, man.
They're an intense band. They're beautiful people, my good friends. But when they get down to the nitty-gritty of making a record, they take it seriously, and they struggle sometimes with it. And they're struggling to find that, pushing themselves to another level.
Yeah. So
first couple of records, it really threw me. Like, how do I keep this? How do I run this session? How do I keep it together? Plus, it was a husband and wife dynamic also in there. So it taught me a lot about people-to-people relationships.
It's a trio, right?
It's a trio, yeah.
And would you bring in additional musicians typically on records?
First couple of records, no. And that's what I love about those guys. And, when we were over at Alex the Great, you walk into that studio, they have tons of instruments that, just open up the game for making a record. That's a good thing. That's an important item. If you're going to open a studio, have instruments for people to play. Don't expect everybody to bring their own stuff.
Don't just have a bunch of plugins.
Or have plugins, MIDI, go MIDI.
Yeah.
No, I had a band from Denmark show up to do a record, and I'm thinking, I didn't even think about it, but, they're going to bring some stuff. They came with a Hofner bass. That's all they brought. And in 8 days, we made this beautiful record.
A hell of a bass record.
Yeah, it was all based around the bass. No, they just used everything around here. And, the bass player played violin. I have a violin here. The drummer played harmonica. I had a harmonica that's laying around. It's just have instruments in your studio. Anyway, the good thing about Yo La Tengo that I always loved is they may not, and I got in trouble for saying this once before, they may not have been the most proficient, best musicians ever, but if they wanted to play a vibe part, they would sit and figure it out and come up with this beautiful, simple vibe part. Or they would play, we tried to have them do everything. Yeah. And then occasionally we had some horns come in, we had strings later on, but it was pretty much the core 3 guys doing everything, piano, whatever they needed to do.
Well, so something that strikes me about Yo La Tengo and what I know about, artists from when I started in about 90, 91 through the next couple of decades is they were, and you talk about them, not necessarily, proficiency wasn't their first calling, right? It was more about having a really beautiful artistic idea and creating it in the studio. And of course,
and sometimes they not so beautiful.
Right, all right, fair enough.
Gnarly.
When they create stuff and when their records come out, it's that way that the imperfections come together and to such a cool thing that makes us love the record so much, right?
Yeah.
And also that, somehow they're a band that managed to decide to do this, take it seriously enough, and continue through 7 records with you and, a couple of decades
15.
of career. 15 records. Wow.
30 years.
30 years of making records with you. They're still a band. Let's talk about that. I mean, that's more remarkable than somebody who comes in and plays the most hot shit guitar you've ever seen, and then next year you don't know where they are.
Longevity and that sustain is unbelievable. I've actually had 2 bands. Even Lamb Chop's not 30, but this band from Germany called Element of Crime. They just hit 30. I've known those guys for 30 years now. It is an amazing thing. But if you understand Yo La Tengo, this is their life. This is what they've dedicated their life to, this band, making this music. And, it is, I went up to New York and they asked me to come up and play for their 30th reunion show. And it's just the core of these guys. They're still the same guys. They're still the same band. They each do their own little thing for the band. James does one thing. Ira does this stuff for the band. Georgia does this. And this is their life. And it's so beautiful to see them still going and continuing.
How about the audience? What was the audience like? Did you feel like it was the same? Or
there
was more evolution in the audience than on the stage?
It was a little older. It was a little weird. It was, 50-year-olds in the audience, and it's interesting to see that these are the same people I saw when I went to the show to see Painful when we made that record, But
I think that's cool as shit, man. That's actually the thing that but that was my aha moment that gives me hope, is realizing one day that, wait a minute, as we get older, all the cool bands that we liked when we were young, they get older too, and the music that we want to make, it's all the people our age that want to still hear that,
Right. Yeah.
Like for some reason as a kid, you just think about old people and you're like, oh, they only like old people music. So when I get old, I won't get to like cool music anymore.
It's all relative, man.
It's all relative, man.
It's all relative. And, there were younger audience. I mean, I still have a bunch of young kids come up to me and say, "Oh, those Yo La Tengo," or "I love those Yo La Tengo." You know, it's just it's a nice thing. But
was just thinking about like, you know, that down the road a ways when 60-year-olds are going to be like rocking hard EDM dubstep, you know, that's going to be their thing.
Oh, that's all. I think it's already there.
All right, cool, man. I'm still digging it. All right, so let's see. What else should we talk about? Let's talk about tracking an indie rock band. What should somebody know about, you know, just however you want to riff on it. You're about to track an indie rock band. What should you be thinking about before the session?
Well, I'm a big proponent of, I like freshness. I like moving a session along. I love sessions that at the end of the day, the band feels like, wait, did we do that already? Are we done? Wow. And it's good. I like a session where you don't feel like you came in and you're pounding and recording. It just happens. And I think that when you set the tone of the session in a way that can happen, you know, it's almost like you dupe someone into getting their job done and they don't even know they did it already.
Nice.
You know? But I am a proponent of a little bit of pre-production. So a lot of times I'll set the band up outside in my live room and we'll run through it. We'll get all the bugs out. We'll edit. We'll do this. We'll arrange. We'll make sure everything's as it should be.
And maybe that's a day or 2 days before you start recording?
No, it could be even 20 minutes before the session.
Okay, cool.
Or 20 minutes of time. You guys, I have a bunch of small amps set up out here. Let's run through the song. Let me hear your parts.
And that's not even in the same position that they're going to be recording in?
No. That's just like, this is what we're going to do right now. Take a break once we get that done, and then I start moving, isolating. If I want to do that, I've cut some, couple of songs on various records that we just no headphones, and I baffle things off enough, and that bleed is a beautiful thing. I did this kind of soul record, not soul record. It was kind of a old-timey sounding song to me, so I wanted that old-timey idea of recording.
Did you almost record it to the wax cylinder?
I tried, but they were, you know. But so a little pre-production could be 20 minutes before. And also it's getting used to the studio, especially if it's a new band. They're walking in here. What's it sound like in this room? How do I make my shit sound good? Like, so once we get the real core of the song, then I start moving everybody into the room. And the key to me is headphones. If they're going to wear headphones, give them the best possible mix. If you have one of those self-mixer devices, go listen to their headphones and make sure they're not the loudest guy and everybody else is ghosting and that's all they're listening to is themselves. I think that performance-wise, if you can get that headphone mix, people don't pay enough attention to headphones, I don't think, especially when tracking. Because if you can get them comfortable and they can hear themselves not too much where they're still hearing everybody else and they're all playing to one another, you're going to get a great track.
How often do you find that the two mix that you're listening to and hear can be sufficient for what they're hearing in the headphones?
A lot. I only have 2 pairs of stereo headphone mixes.
Oh, so, good. I thought you were going to say 2 pairs of stereo headphones.
No. I have only mono headphones. No, so I if I feel like, you know, I need to split off the drummer and the bass player with a click and I don't want anybody else to hear a click, if we're doing clicks, you know, I'll figure that out as I go. But I think headphones are really, really important to make them feel and play with each other and listen to one another and really get a good track. If you're going to cut live, it's important.
So, yeah, a couple of things on that. I also do that too, you know, pretty much the mix I'm doing is what I start with out there. And then it's like, if there's a problem, then I'll try and address it and add more stuff. And I find that mostly people their problem is that they need more of themselves.
Are you stereo headphones or
it's just, yeah, not mono headphones. No, they're stereo headphones and I send the mix out there and then my boxes have a little additional boost. You can add more of something.
Okay,
yeah.
so you do have a little sub-mixer
and
for
it's
them.
very not fancy, you know.
Yeah. That's good.
But the other thing that I think is a cool takeaway from you talking about the pre-production is that your answer about them, no, just being over here on the side working on the song and then start figuring out where everybody's going to be for tracking. It's not like just because that's simple. It's actually even deeper than that, that you wouldn't want them to be in position because you don't want them to play getting that recorded sound 5 times. Then it's like, okay, let's get the take now. Because then that's like you're killing all that energy.
Right. No, you want to get it like 1, 2 takes if you can get it. So
yeah,
that's why a little pre-production
new
in some other area, and then they come in and it's fresh and we hit it. The other thing I'd like to say is I had the honor to work with Jim Keltner, great drummer, and
it's good because my next question was about getting great drum recordings.
He taught me one thing, and that was the rest. The rest note is so important as your note. And I always live by that. If you don't have that space, that next note that hits won't have that impact it does. Right? So when you see bands play live, it kills me a lot of times because they're on stage. Everybody's going to be playing from the top of the song to the end of the song. Rarely do you see guys hold back, stop playing for the verse, come in for the chorus. No, they're going to play.
Right, because it's too awkward to stand there and do nothing on stage. So a lot of times
bands come into the studio with that same mentality, and I say, no. Let's break the verse down. Let's leave some space because that's a cool bass tone. You won't even hear it, So I would like to emphasize that editing down a song and just making the meat and potatoes of what you really need is super important.
Well, it reminds me of your example of the Paula Cole record. There have been times where I've tracked and there are a bunch of instruments going at once. Maybe you're doing a session and you've brought in a band to work with an artist and you've only got one day and everybody's there for that one day. And it gets tricky. Sometimes you just have to, as a producer, make a decision to just simply remove some of the players from the tracking.
Yeah.
Just say, you know what, let's not put any whatever on this song right now. We'll come back and do it later.
Absolutely.
Just narrow it down to the very essence of what you actually need. All right, so let's talk about drum recording. Great advice from Jim. Just give us a great tip for getting a killer drum sound. I remember when I did, maybe it was the Toy Bean record with you, you had me put out a couple of ambient mics out in front of the kit, down low on the ground.
Didn't we do an amp too?
We might have, yeah.
Sometimes I take like a extra snare mic, so I have 2 mics on the snare and one's getting fed to a booth through an amp with reverb or some tremolo or pedals or something like that, just so I can tuck that in. And it's like, wait a minute, what is that?
Yeah.
Why does the snare sound like that? Lidge, one rule I live by, and this, I got to tell you a funny story about Yo La Tengo too. It's tied in, if I may take up the time to do this. I'll go to the Yo La Tengo story. So I walked over to House of David here in Nashville, and it was the first time I thought to myself, wow, I'm bringing Yo La Tengo to Music Row. This is crazy. It's like a clash. It's not going to work, but House of David's good, and the console was great. It was an API. And I walked in. Yo La Tengo didn't show up. I'm just trying to get the lay of the land. And I start tearing down their drum setup, moving the baffles, moving mics, and the assistant comes out and goes, whoa, what are you doing? I was like, I'm getting ready to set up the drums. We're going to, no. You're not using, you got to use these. I was like, no. I'm not recording with this setup. This isn't what we're doing. He goes, that's been there for 3 years. What are you doing? That was their drum sound. So I went into a studio and just tore apart the thing they
had
finally
crafted.
found.
Yeah. Oh, no.
But the reason why I brought that up is I don't ever do anything once. I repeat myself.
Right.
I try not to.
Yeah.
I've done the Glenn John miking. I've done room mic. I've done nothing but a room mic. What is the song call for again? What does the piece of music need as far as drums? I'm not a big like drums up front, drive the song. I'm a Hal Blaine where the part's really big and beautiful, but it's ambient too. It's in the back. I lean towards more of that. So what is the space like that you're recording in? That's another key thing. Do you want live? Do you want it small? Do you want watch for phase. I've been that crazy guy in the 80s where I've had like 14, 20 mics on drums.
Right,
you know?
right.
It's like triggers, you know. I'm down to like maybe 5 microphones, you know. Or if I can get away with 4.
I like it. Well, so you talk about like, you know, what does the song call for? I think for somebody who maybe hasn't had the experience yet, you might be like, well, I don't know. I need to know something. So maybe the best advice for rock stars listening is just start by recording with one mic on a drum kit, try some different stuff, add a second mic,
again,
add a third mic.
Like you just said, you have a whole band there and you wait a minute, can we cut this with just 3 of you guys? 2 of you come in here and just sit down. Start with one mic and see that I had one mic.
But maybe not on the session with the artist.
No,
maybe this is beforehand.
No, I'm saying beforehand.
Practicing.
Do a little practice. I come in here, I still practice. I come in here at night. My wife goes to bed early every night. I'm a late night guy. If I don't have a session, I'll come in here and try things. You know, I still try things. I still want to discover how to manipulate physics. You know,
Right.
That's my favorite thing to do in the world. Anything to do with physics. Let me see if
I can break it.
Break it and bend it.
Breaking quantum physics.
Start with one. See how it sounds when you move that one mic around. I mean, moving mics is one of the biggest things, you know, ever to me, is finding that, you know, tone, especially when you have multi-miking. You're going to find where's the best phase coherency? Where's what drum am I trying to capture with this mic? Because I'm getting this one in there too much, you know.
Right.
So really listen to that stuff and move things around. Sometimes, again, I would say try not to cop other people's ideas too much. Maybe use that as the starting point, but always bring it to your own individual take on what thing is, you know.
All right, cool. So we're about to take a break and then we'll come in for the jam session, our last round of questions. But before we go out, let me ask you for some tips on recording great vocals, great vocal performances. I mean, you talked about getting a live take out of Paula Cole. What are some other things that are great tips if you're maybe in an overdub vocal situation?
Again, headphones and freshness, you know. Yeah, I think, you know, you could beat anything. There was a great talk by, and I can't remember who gave it the talk, but it's something called the Lafferty curve. You know this thing?
No.
So it's a meter that this guy designed, and at minus 100, there's nothing happening. In the middle, at 0, you've nailed it. And then plus 100, you've gone so far beyond that you've lost it, totally lost it. And I love that fact. But there's a point where freshness, 1, 2, 3 takes, don't beat the person down. Also, if you're missing parts, really pay attention, take your notes, and find the bits you like and why you like those bits from the vocalist. And if you need that stuff throughout, then you can go back and punch. You know, I think it comes down to making that comfortable. I think you had a talk with Brad Jones about microphones and vocals. And I've done like everybody else, rented mics from Blackbird that I don't have. And I can't remember what session it was, but female vocalist, 47s, C12s, blah,
all the
blah,
expensive
blah,
stuff.
blah, blah. And then an SM7. And literally, I just love the way the SM7 sounds. But I like Coles on vocals, certain vocalists. It's like listen to the vocal also, like the actual vocalist. Sing in front of me, right? And listen to what their voice sounds like. And then say to yourself, what would be a good chain to record? Some people have low, bassy voices. Some people have the sharp, couple of girls. I was like, that's killing me. What mic can I use to help minimize that without doing EQ on it or something like that? So listen to the vocalist in the room right next to him and say, what is it that will take that voice and make it what I want it to make it? Yo La Tengo, the first time I worked with him, Iris sang so soft, I thought my mic pre was broken. I was like, it was cranked, and I went out, and I was like, the mic must be. Ira, what are you doing? He's like, I was like, oh, okay, wait, now I got it. So I double mic pre'd the vocal because I couldn't get any gain out of it. So.
Yeah. I've had something like that happen once before, and I was the same thing. I'm like, what am I doing wrong?
So listen to the source with your own ears, and then figure out what it is.
So I would add this advice too. Initially, you might go listen to the voice, but you might still feel like, well, I don't know what the hell mic to use. Sounds great on that. So in order to gain that knowledge of what the different mics sound like, I think the follow-up listen, which is when something does start sounding good, also go out and listen to the voice on that mic so that you register, oh, this guy with that kind of voice sounded great on this particular mic, or she sounded excellent on this mic. Right. So you begin to know, Yeah. And it's that giving yourself a lot of opportunity to go out to the tracking room, come to the control room, go back and forth. Don't just get too comfortable in a chair. In fact, don't even buy yourself a chair for the first 15 years of your record
Last
making.
night we're doing a session. It was actually kind of cool, if I could say. I had three guitars, a bass and 2 electric guitars. And the artist had the idea of, this is the core of the song. I just want this to be one instrument. Like I want these parts to sound like one instrument. So I went and plugged them all direct into the PA out there. And they all sat with no headphones, put it through the PA. I mic'd the PA. I put room mics up like in front of them so I could actually hear some physicality from their and then I took a DI, a direct out of the headphones, out of the mixing console out there. So everything was being processed by one device in a way.
Nice.
And it ended up sounding like one guy playing this weird bass 2 guitar instrument. It's just like, it was cool.
I mean, it's cool that you've got a place with enough space for a PA in there too.
Right.
I don't really have a PA. Well, I do. Actually, I got no excuse. Liz, go use your PA more. All right, so we're going to take a break, and we'll come back in for the jam session. Rockstars, before we do, I just want to remind you can find show notes to all this stuff at rsrockstars.com. Just search for Roger. And if you really dug the music at the intro of the podcast, you can check that out at skadooshmusic.com. That's SKADOOSH. And if you want to let the world know what kind of a rock star you are, go get yourself a T-shirt. Check those out. rsrockstars.com/T-shirt. All right,
I want one.
We'll go hit the website.
All right.
Peace. We'll see you in a sec, rock stars. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks. And you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, Rockstars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Hey, Rockstars, we're back for the jam session. My guest today is Roger Moutenot, and we're joining you today from his studio, Hap-Town Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. Roger, are you ready to jam?
I am ready to jam. What are you playing?
I don't know. It looks like I'm playing a computer,
Okay.
some
I'll play
papers,
this
a microphone. I'm playing with my beard. That's what I'm doing.
Okay.
All right. So tell us, when you were starting out and recording, what was holding you back?
Knowledge of what it is that was actually happening with the gear, with the vibration of a string. Why is all this working? How can I make it work for me and understand what it is? And that's when I chose to go to school. And as boring as math and physics are, I think you need a backbone. I maintain my own studio. Not everything. I can't fix everything, but I'll get in there and take something apart and, replace a part or whatever it is. And it's only because I know the physics and the technical, things that drive this gear. And I think that's important. So knowledge.
Were you ever
read as many books as you can about this shit?
Are you a solder jockey, as some people like to call it?
I am. I've soldered so much that I got to the point where I hate soldering with a passion. As you know, your studio is awesome, but you know the amount of wiring that it takes to do. I've done a lot of this myself, and I don't look forward to it, but I do it.
I've always enjoyed soldering, but I took enough of a break from when I used to solder a lot to when I go back and solder, now I start to do it and I'm like, well, shit, I can't see anything I'm doing now. I need that's super magnifying glasses to even see what I'm working
my
on.
Eyeballs are not what they used to be. So. But I still do it.
It's all that time staring at computer screens. If I'm going to blame it on something other than, acknowledging that it's just getting older.
No, you're just getting older.
All right, man. So now how about sharing with us some of the best advice you received?
Probably to take all this world we're in and make it your own. I was blessed because I worked in a time where there was as an assistant in the studio beginning, a great parade of brilliant producers coming through, brilliant engineers. And all I did was sit there and watch these people and say, I like what that guy does. I like how he runs this session. He's not a stop-start kind of guy where, he's jumping on people to play the right part. He's letting a flow happen. I don't, or this guy just is so angry about something. I don't know, and it's stopping that, so I just watched people, drew from that to make my own self, What does that guy do that I like? I'm going to utilize his ideas. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try to incorporate that part of it into my, and little by little you discover yourself and who you want to be and who you want to, and how you want to approach this career. And I forgot the question you asked me. So
that was it. You pretty much answered it. It was, what was the best advice you received? Which was, what was it?
Make it your own. Make it your own. Make your studio your own. Make it unique. Muscle Shoals, we hear records from there. Why do we like that? There was something about that room that he left some sounds in there. He doctored some of the sounds in the room. Find that space. Find what it is you're doing and make it your own. Make it unique. So that, I've been to crap loads of studios. Some were designed strictly by math. And you go in there and you could be anywhere in the world. It's boring as hell. Or there's a room you go into, Magic Shop. That room was horrible in certain cases sonically, but you found what could work in that horrible situation and make it to your benefit.
Yeah.
But it still had a sound. It had some unique thing about it that when you left the room, it's like, oh, Magic Shop. Oh, Muscle Shoals. Oh, I did work on the Ocean Way in L.A. where Frank Sinatra, Pet Sounds, all that stuff. There was a sound in that room. Mm-hmm. But Sunset, that's a great. It's not an exceptionally treated room, but there's something very unique about it.
Yeah. Yeah, Sunset's a very cool place. I got to spend a few weeks in Studio C, the Prince room, and It was really cool. Well, it takes me back to your aha moment where you talked about realizing that the weirdness of what you brought ended up being the strength that got you your biggest record or one of your big records. And learned that too, that it's like the thing that is most uniquely us that we bring to what we do is also our greatest strength for creating the best stuff that we can and finding the best opportunities. And so building your studio to be the kind of space that really is all about you and the way you do it is probably going to have the biggest impact.
Yeah. So people walk in here, it's, does it look like a studio? I guess it does, but it's comfortable. I have lots of, places people can get away and sit, but I want it to feel like you had a living room or somebody's house.
And it's a big control room. The control room's bigger than the other spaces.
Yeah.
Except for that one right there. All right, cool. So now how about a favorite or just a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something the rock stars could use today on their next session?
Secret sauce.
Something fun, some cool thing.
Well, that little spring reverb, like I said, I didn't think, that was just sitting in the back room in the maintenance area for the longest time. And I was like, well, why not use that thing, right? So I brought it and wired it up, plugged it in, and I put a snare through that. Or if I have a dry guitar part that I want to sound like an amp reverb, I got it.
So and that could apply to just about anything. So if somebody's got something different, maybe there's a way to just take something from your session, feed it out to a guitar amp and mic that up and bringing it on a track while you're recording.
Yeah, utilize stuff that, normally, at one point I had we talked about old Pro Tools. I had my 888, the Mix Plus system, and that was basically, I had so many plugins in that thing that it became an outboard gear. Like,
interesting.
I just said, it was like a big processor.
So you had a secondary Pro Tools rig going. That's cool. I
set
like
it
that
up,
idea.
and if I wanted some crazy, because there were so many crazy plugins, if I wanted some effect, I would use it as a send, and now it's like a rack piece of outboard gear that.
I like that, man. I like that. It's a great way to keep using the old technology. Don't remove it and have to put it in a closet. Just move it over to the side and use it as outboard gear.
Sideboard, side console, like. I have that 388 Tascam reel-to-reel. Mm-hmm. It's like, I utilize that. I'm a pack rat. I never get rid of anything. So.
Yeah. All right, cool. Maybe I'll fire my computer back up. It was kind of loud though. All right, so now how about a cool hardware tool, something that when you're in sessions, something physical, could be anything at all, but just some physical thing that you're sort of always glad you got it around for a session?
Well, I gotta say, I've recently purchased a bunch of stuff, some ribbon microphones, Coles, and extra stuff like that. But some of the outboard gear I just recently bought is Stay Level. I love what it does. My API mic pre's, the Neve, Rack of Neves, those are my go-to.
Rack of Neves.
Rack of Neves.
Get yourself a Rack of Neves.
But find that piece of gear. I have beautiful Electrodyne mic pre that I wish I had a whole console of that, because it's there's such soul when you put it through a certain piece of gear that, it just drives me nuts. I love that.
Yeah. So once again, rock stars, get yourself some good mic pre's if you can.
Mic pre's, microphones. More importantly, again, invest in some instruments.
Yeah.
You
got to start with the right sound.
Yeah. You got to have, I have I'm lucky. I got a Vox Jaguar. I got Rhodes, a Whirly, two different Hammond organs. And, if someone has an idea, there shouldn't be like, oh, well, I can't do that. But, have instruments for people to put forth their ideas.
And I would say, because I've experienced this too, I don't have a Whirly, I don't have a Rhodes yet, but it comes up as an instrument that would be nice to have on a session. And sometimes the workaround is just take the time out, when you're not in a session to figure out what's the easiest way I can get some, halfway decent or hopefully very good sounding plug-in sounds for those instruments in my studio in the control room so that when the session happens, we can just go, yep, here's a whirly,
Right.
And again, that might be a great use for an old rig, take the additional computer and just set it up as an instrument sound thing. Feed it into your Pro Tools rig, and you don't have to get too complex with it.
So I have multiple Pro Tools. One's just the processor, one's instruments. I got to say, Lidge, it drives me nuts. I got a couple of friends that I help produce some projects they're working on, and they're all MIDI. And they're all, getting sounds from sound designer plug-in programs, right. And it drives me nuts.
Yeah, the session gets so complex.
It gets complex, but they're never going to be that physical sound you get from a real whirly, or it's never. I'm sorry. As much as everybody says it's modeling, it's perfect, it just doesn't have that effect.
When was the last time you wanted perfect anyway?
But that's the thing. It's not perfect.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. These sounds in those boxes are tempered. They were all tempered, evenly tempered. So this note sounds just like the next one. My Rhodes in there has a couple of notes that bite and not bite. And that, it's a charm. Just like those real Mellotrons, each one sounded differently. The wheels wouldn't be at speed. You'd have to hold your hand to slow it down slightly so it was in pitch. When we heard those, we were like, oh, that's so beautiful. So I think the stuff that's a little quirky and maybe not perfect is what touches our hearts more than just this even tempered thing that just sounds the same throughout the whole scale of the instrument. You know what I mean? So those imperfections are charming and endearing and stuff like that. And I gravitate towards those.
All right. So now let's go into software for a minute. What are some software tools that you really dig? You talked about only a handful of plugins. You want to talk about those?
It's just the tools, it's the hammer and nails, it's the saw. It's, I've built, my very first thing I built was a bookshelf, and I had a handsaw and I had a drill. And I cut the wood with the handsaw and I drilled holes to put dowels in and some glue. And that thing is the sturdiest thing I ever built. I still have it. I could have used table saws and all that stuff. I didn't have it. I had a handsaw and a drill. To me, my plugins are that way. I don't want to do too much with them. They're tools that if at the end of the day, I need a little shelving, blah, 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 I have that. That's all I want to do with it. I want some compression. I want a little bit of limiting. I have those tools, and that's all I want to do. I don't want to. If I'm going to distort something, I'm going to distort it getting to Pro Tools through some device I have, double mic preing, amps,
pedals. An amp, yeah.
That's where I want to get my distortion. I don't want to come in from, I have a decapitator, but to me, I it's more a balls thing.
Right.
Just to bring up the balls of the sound. Right. I have enough in there just to do what it's doing. I have EMT plates that I send for reverbs. I don't even really use the reverb in there. I have tape machines for delays. I like the physicality of that more than plugins. So I have enough plugins to do my tiny bit of carving or shaving or subtleties, but most of the bastardization comes from real shit.
Yeah. Plugins for adjusting, not manipulating.
Yeah. All
right, cool. So now how about a resource for the business side of doing this? I mean, you've been doing this professionally for decades. What tip or resource or advice do you have for people about, managing the business aspect of doing this professionally?
Good luck. It's changed so much. Again, when I started in 79, there was an infrastructure in this music business that was really kind of cool. It's grassroots right now. So to me, two things. One, as far as engineering and running a studio, go out and see bands, find bands, and find shit you like. Work on stuff you like. Don't work on things you don't like because it's going to make you miserable. You're going to be wasting their time and you're going to be wasting your own time. There's no way. That was a great argument throughout my whole career with my wife. do jingles, make money. I can't sit in front of speakers for 8 hours and work on something I don't like. I've been lucky enough that I only worked on shit, and it makes your work better and it makes you a happier person. But go out and find bands that you really, really like and, do your thing with them, live, there's the old thing, pay your dues. So if you're just starting out, don't worry about it. Pay your dues, live this life, live the studio, live in the studio. I lived in the studio when I got my first job at Skyline, live there. I mean, literally slept there. I wouldn't want to leave because if I left, I felt like I was going to get
out of session.
Next guy's going to come in, So I missed family functions. I did that. So I just lived this life and definitely say right now I paid my dues. I paid.
How long do you think there was the chapter where you were living in the studio like that? When do you think? How long do you think you did it before you started to look for some balance?
4 or 5.
4 or 5 years.
6 years. In those 5 years, I can say I pretty much lived in the studio. If they needed something, I was there. If that's the way it was.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
And I still live this life. I still want to pay my dues and be the best I can.
All right. So now, how about an organizational tool or resource? Maybe something in the computer or something, or just some method that you use here to keep all your shit organized and together.
I will say most important, and especially nowadays, is documenting settings. Like I said, I throw everything out on the console. I don't have recall. And nowadays, I might mix a band from, I mixed this couple of songs for this band from Louisiana. Sent me the files, mixed it, sent it back to them. They took a week to get back to me, went back out, mixed it again, tweaked it, sent it back to them. So being I had to throw things on the console, I might use a little EQ on the console, rarely don't, but I do go through some outboard gear. So photo with where you can write on it. So I have this, I know there's probably a bunch of those things out there.
Tell us the one you use. Yeah, it's great.
Well, actually, it's a joke now because my son worked for a company that called Drift, and they came up with this beautiful thing where you could take a picture and text right on the picture. So I started using that. Drift is the company. So this compression setting is for this song, for the vocal, blah, blah, blah. And I just got an upgrade on my phone, and my phone does it. So I have to document stuff, and I type in what song it is, what session, and it's right there. I can recall it. So
what are you, on iPhone or something?
Yeah.
And does our newest iPhone, I haven't even checked it yet, does it let us type now and put text right over the, there you go, Rockstars. That's it right there.
Yeah, no,
it's the new millennium, finally.
Because that's the age we're in. It's, not necessarily getting done right away in one session, one long-winded. Yo La Tengo, they would come and we'd finish a record. You know what I mean?
Right.
But, there's a lot of sessions that it's a day here, a week there. You come back to it. If you're in Pro Tools and everything's in Pro Tools, you're set. But, if you are using outboard gear or you're take a picture of how far the mic was from the amp and, just to get back to a sound if you want to tweak something,
Yeah, I'm a big fan of doing that.
So it's just that getting back to something nowadays is important.
All right, cool. So now here's a couple of hypothetical questions. Imagine you had to start all over again. You didn't have all this stuff. You needed something simple to start with recording. You needed to meet people, and you needed to make ends meet doing it. Or you're giving the advice to somebody who's doing that now. What would you say about those three things?
Well, when I moved here, I kind of started over again. A lot of my clients in New York were like, well, we got to fly you up. We got to put you up now. No, there's some guys up here we can get down. It's like, oh, shit. So for a year, I had to rethink of what it is. How do I do this? How do I keep going? I was traveling still. So there were LA, Europe, whatever connections. But as far as getting my myself running again was meeting people, was finding out who plays in this town, what's going on, what studios are around. If you don't have gear, maybe like you did, Lidge, you found Robin and Brad, said, hey, I can help, and incorporate yourself in somebody else's setup. But if you're just starting out, my 4-track was the best education possible. I had 4 ideas to get, or how do I use these 4 windows, these 4 individual tracks to get a whole concise, beautiful idea down. Start small.
Am I remembering correctly that at one point, too, you took your old 4-track studio and set it up for your son in his room, and he was making songs on it? I thought I remembered you, or maybe you had it at the house.
I had it at the house.
That's what it was. That's what it was.
No,
yeah.
that was a good story. It's like my son would say, give me 2 of me, and I didn't understand what that meant, but he meant delay or something else. So I remember we were goofing off in my little home studio when I first moved here. And he had a microphone. I was like, okay, just sing. Don't touch this stuff over here. Just sing. And I ran to go use the restroom, and all of a sudden I heard, beep. And I ran into the room, and he was up against the wall with this face on like, oh my God, what's happening? And he had pushed the fader up and got feedback.
Oh man, that's hilarious.
But yeah, I say, even if it's like the M-Box or start small and do what I do sometimes. Open up 4 channels in Pro Tools. Don't give yourself 20, 30 channels. 4 channels, and see what you can make of those 4 channels. See what ideas, nice. how concise and edited you can be, and get the most out of those things. If you can make music with that, you can do.
All right. So, and then you talked about going out to clubs and stuff to meet people. So you kind of covered that. What about making ends meet? What advice do you have for people as far as, they want to do this? Should they drop everything and only make money in music right off the bat, or should they mix it up?
Well, you got to do what you got to do. And I say mix it up if you need to. But if you are serious about this, like I said, you got to pay your dues. I lived in my van in New York City for 2 months. When I got hired. Well, I basically didn't get hired.
Yeah, downtown Manhattan. That's a great safe place to live in.
No, I was in Midtown.
Okay, right. Of course, Midtown's much safer.
I got broken into twice while sleeping.
Oh,
but
man.
I lived in my van because the studio gave me an opportunity of ripping me off of my talents for nothing. For 2 months, they didn't pay me, and I just show up every day.
It was your internship, right? It
was my internship, yeah. And do whatever they did, but I was too embarrassed to ask my parents for money. So I lived in my van, for 2 months. Wow. And then I realized, oh, wait, I could just sleep at the studio. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool, man. All right, so here comes the last question. This one is hypothetical too, and we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. And you, Roger, today are going to go back and find young Roger in New Jersey, Cliffside, and you're going to tap yourself on the shoulder, turn around and go, whoa, what are you doing here? And you're going to say, well, I've come here to give you this advice. I want to tell you the one thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you give yourself?
As in any artful thing, anybody could pick a guitar up and strum a note. But if you can understand the world, read poetry, movies, relationships, how you dress, how other people dress, why buildings stand, just understanding so much of everything about life, and bring that into your music and bring that into the way you do things. It's not about, I know Pro Tools, I know how this mic pre-works, but bring love into it, bring sadness, bring everything about the world that turns us on and turns us off, bring that into that knob and make that come through the speakers. Then you're onto something. And I would say, I'd probably tell myself that, just be knowledgeable in other areas because you can draw from those other areas.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I like that. I don't think I've gotten anything even close to that for that answer to that question yet. So thank you for that. Well, Roger, that brings us to a close, man. Thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's been awesome
honored,
chatting with
Lidge,
you.
and I'll always say this about you. When I first met you, I knew there was something unique about you, and your smarts and your determination, and you've really come a long way. And I think this is probably one of the better things for kids out there to listen to. Not me, other podcasts, not me. I was a waste of time, but to actually get inspired. I got to say a couple of things.
Yeah.
Real quick.
Please do.
There's a new documentary out, Soundbreaking.
Right.
It's fantastic. Watch it. It will inspire you. It will show you the history of where we've come from. And I think that's a great new device out there to spark some excitement about what you do. Be happy about what you do, love what you do, and you'll be successful. It's infectious when you love what you do.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, kind of like the Yo La Tengo show, we have younger rock stars listening to this podcast, but there's also a lot of people who are, pretty close to our age. I received an email one day from somebody in their 70s who was just chiming in saying they really enjoyed the show.
Well, Lidge, I got to say, I am a listener.
Right on, man. Well, thank you. I'm glad.
I love listening to this because
I like having only the best as listeners.
Because, Joe, your last podcast, you can learn something from everybody. There's always great things said through your podcasts. And
I'm with you, man. I've learned a ton already.
You doing this.
Well, thank you, dude.
All right, man.
I look forward to seeing more of you around the studio, and maybe we'll kick up a real jam session.
That would be awesome.
All right, dude. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.